Welcome back, everybody. I'm Jason with Bent's Woodworking. This week, I've partnered with Bits & Bits Company to bring you this video. They were nice enough to send me a couple of their basic router bit sets to try out and use on this project. Bits & Bits carries a wide range of white sides router bits with their proprietary Astra coating. You'll see me using different bits during this video, and if you want to find out more, I will leave a link to their website down below where you can go and check out everything that they have to offer. Now that I have the lumber milled, the first step to this was to prepare my two side pieces. And this is one large piece that I will later rip down, but what I wanted to make sure that I did is I wanted to make dados to hold each one of the shelves, because I want each one of the shelves to be easily removable and adjustable. So to help ensure that all of my lines were perfect on both sides, is I actually took the board at its full width and cut all of my dados. And then that way, when I go to rip it down like you see here, I know that both sides are a perfect match to one another. Once I got done with the two sides, it was time for me to go ahead and grab all the other material. And so luckily this project is made primarily of scrap material that I had laying around the shop. And it's going to be made of both walnut and maple. So once I identified all my pieces, I cut all the proper widths, I just sent them through my planer and then through the drum sander to help alleviate some of the finish work at the end and get things back down to my final dimensioning. Once I had everything at the dimension that I wanted, I then took all the pieces back over to my miter saw where I cut everything to final length. And as with any project, I always leave my stuff oversized so I can go through this same process. Now, the majority of the work from this point forward is primarily on my router table. And so here, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create all of my shelves. And the first bit that I'm going to be using is this rabbiting bit. I took a few minutes to go ahead and get everything perfectly dialed in on my router table, and it was time to go ahead and start cutting. And the first cuts that I'm making, as I usually do, is just a test piece, because I want to make sure that my tenons fit in each one of the dados. Once I did that, I went back over to my router table and went ahead and cut each one of my shelves before moving to the next step. Once I finished cutting the tenons for each one of my shelves, I went ahead and switched over to the 1/4 inch straight bit. I'm using a 1/4 inch straight bit because the primary joinery for this project is actually going to be finger joints. So after I get my router table all set up, I took my top and bottom pieces for the frame itself, clamped them together, and ran them through my router table, which, as you can see here, makes very quick work of finger joints, and the accuracy is dead on. And after my joints were cut, I did a quick dry fit and everything lined up perfectly. Now that I know my joinery is good, I'm using the same 1/4 inch straight bit to cut some grooves which will accept the panel that will go inside of this cabinet. Now, since it's finger joints, I wanted to make sure that the cuts did not impose on the fingers themselves. So with the top and bottom, with the maple, I actually had to drop it in and lift it up at the end as where the side pieces lined up just right. And once I have those grooves cut, I head back over to my assembly table where I do a quick dry fit and get my measurements for the panel that I will need for the inside of the cabinet itself. Once I had my measurements, I grabbed my 1/4 inch maple plywood, went over to the table saw, ripped it to its desired width, and then cut it to its final length at the miter saw. Once everything was cut, I removed the top, slid the 1/4 inch plywood into the cabinet, and then replaced the top to make sure that the dry fit with the panel, everything still lined up, which it did. And then this was an opportunity for me to go ahead and test out my shelves. Once I knew everything was good, it was time to go ahead and do my glue up. And now with finger joints, it's kind of a tedious process during a glue up, obviously because you want to make sure you get a decent amount of glue on as much surface area as possible. But one of these small brushes really helps So I started with the bottom, slid in my panel, attached the top, and once I attached the top, it was time to go ahead and get it in clamps. To assist in making sure everything stayed square, I used some of these woodpecker corner clamps, and they did an excellent job in making sure that my piece stayed square during the glue up. I let the cabinet sit overnight so the glue would have time to dry, and disassembled everything, and then it was time to work on each one of my corners. And to do that, I just had to do a very little bit of sanding, and it identified a couple of spots that needed to be filled. I used some of this dark wood glue along with this walnut sawdust that I keep around specifically for this purpose. And I just mixed the two together, and once I had everything filled, I let it dry, went back, sanded it, and it took care of any imperfections. Next, it was time to start working on the stiles and rails for my door. The way that I constructed these stiles and rails is actually a domino, and I also used the straight bit again to go ahead and cut my grooves, and I had to do the same principle here where I drop the board down onto the bit and don't go all the way to the end because I don't want the slots to be visible. Once I had the slots cut, I went back over and tested it on the piece of polycarbonate, otherwise known as plexiglass, and made sure that everything fit. As soon as I was done with that, I laid out my markings for my dominoes, cut my dominoes, and then again tested out my alignment with a quick dry fit. After the dry fit, I moved back over to my table saw where I cut the polycarbonate, and I was a little bit nervous initially because this was the first time I had ever done this, but it seemed to work out really, really well. And the cut quality was much better on the miter saw than the table saw because I have a much finer blade. Once I had those cut, obviously I wanted to do another test fit just to make sure everything fit, and as you can see, it fit great. So now that I know everything is good to go, it was time to go ahead and do the assembly. Just some glue on the dominoes and in the holes, clamp it up, set it off to the side, and let it dry. Another first for me on this project was using this style of hinges. I use these because I wanted the door to have full access so I can easily slide in and out the shelves with the router bits, which you'll see later. It was also the first time that I used this technique to cut out the spot where the hinges will sit. And something that almost never happens in my shop, and that is the use of hand tools. But I must say that I am pretty happy with the way that it turned out overall. Installing these was kind of a trick because, again, I'd never done it before. So I used a self-centering bit to mark where I needed to drill the holes. Unfortunately, my self-centering bit was not small enough for the size screws that came with it. This worked out great, and I was able to get everything lined up. Once I had my door on, I moved over to my drill press, and this is where I'm drilling out each one of the holes to accept the grommets that I am using to hold each one of my router bits. Once that was done, I then wanted to add a magnet. And the reason I'm adding a magnet here is because that is what's actually going to help keep this door closed. And it was really quite simple, and I could have used a latch, but I didn't really want to use a latch for this. I thought the magnet would be a much cleaner look, and it was very simple to do. And the way that I held each one of these magnets in place on the door and the cabinet itself is just with some of this CA glue. The last thing that I had to make is a simple door pull, and I've never made custom door pulls before. So because I had the cove bit as part of the set, I thought using some of this curly maple would give a really cool profile, and I'm really happy with the way it turned out. To add it to the door, I just marked center and used my small little square as a backstop for the pull itself. Used some of the CA glue again to hold it in place, turned the door over, drilled some pilot holes, and then drilled a couple of screws into the back side just to make sure that it doesn't come off at some point. And now it's time for the finish, and something that I had to do, and if I had to go back and do it all over again, I think I would have applied the finish and maybe then assembled the door, but I got pretty good at applying tape after my kitchen renovation, so I went ahead and taped everything off. The finish that I'm using is actually not Rubio on this project, but instead I had some General Finishes Armor Seal, and I've previously made a changing table with this combo, and I love the way the finish looked on it. These are the rubber grommets that I spoke about earlier, and these are made by Rockler. And I have 4 shelves total. 2 of them have 11 holes, 2 of them have 8 holes, all evenly spaced, and I wanted to really maximize how many router bits I could store in this cabinet. Here I'm just laying out all of my old bits with all of my new bits from Bits Company, and just getting an idea of how I want everything to go into these shelves. And after that, it was finally the moment of truth where I got to see my shelf on the wall, which I used a French cleat to hang the shelf like most shelves in my shop, and everything worked out really good. As you can see, the shelves are adjustable, so if you ever did have to move it, it would be no problem. I now have all of my bits stored in one place, along with some of the additional tools specifically for my routers. Okay, so that's it, everybody. I really hope you enjoyed that build video of the router cabinet that you see behind me here. If you guys are interested in building something like this yourselves, head over to my website. There will be plans available for this router cabinet so you can build it too. For those of you that continue to support me, I greatly appreciate it. And if you're new to my channel, consider subscribing and also hit the bell so you're notified every time that I post one of these videos. That's all I have for you this week, everybody. So until next time, get out in the shop, try something new, and I'll see you in the next video.